Hi. Hello, everyone. Hey. So as Peter was saying, I'm Sumit Chandel, developer advocate on Firebase and based in the Google New York office. So I missed it earlier because I was waiting there. But when Peter asked for who this was their first HTML5 meetup, could you raise your hands just so I get an idea? Good number of people. Cool. Yeah, myself included. So is that because you thought Firebase was the main topic and you decided to come? Yes. All right. You've got a special place in my heart. Nice. Thank you. So actually, I'm quite excited to be here because HTML5 is about the web. And something you may not know about me is that I used to be quite active in web development. More specifically, I was active in web tooling development. So I actually worked on a project that allowed developers to write to a single source file, and it would automatically generate cross-browser compliant HTML and JavaScript code to all the different browsers out there that you needed to support. It generated different, sorry, there's a lot of stuff that it did, so I'm really trying to remember all of it. But it also generated different versions of your web application, like different permutations of it, for let's say for Internet Explorer users who are using French locale or English locale and whatnot. And it would generate the JavaScript, HTML, and localized strings that were specific and bootstrapped to that user, so they didn't download any unnecessary cruft. For JSON, it used a serialized JSON that you'd send back and forth between the client and server. It would minify that JSON as well, so you had these like smallest packets possible that you'd send back and forth, again, for the user's sake. And for CSS, a similar thing. It would split out the CSS files that you'd serve to your users based on what browser they were using that was appropriate to them, and had a bootstrap process so that it loaded just that and not anything unnecessary and extra. So I feel quite at home at this meetup group because, again, it's for the web. And of course, the toolkit that I worked on required web developers to write their web applications in, this clicker's not working, but let me do this, in the Java programming language. So obviously that's a joke, which no one got, I guess, because no one's laughing. But yes. So yeah, that is a joke, because when it comes to modern web application development, the last thing that a lot of web developers think about is the Java programming language, right? So who here recognizes what this logo is? Just 2 people, all right. So, all right, 3 people. Well, thank you. This is the logo for the Google Web Toolkit. It kind of dates a little bit when I started working on web development, which is a long time ago. It was the first project that I worked on when I joined Google back in 2007. Now, who here recognizes what this is? All right, a lot more people. Yes. Internet Explorer 6. Yes. And again, I'm dating myself with this reference, but this is kind of actually more the time that I was much more active in web development, was when something like Internet Explorer 6 and other browsers in that time were kind of the de facto standard for a lot of corporate workstation or laptops, browsers that you would use. And you know, developing for the web at that time, for IE6, for Firefox, for Chrome, was not easy, right? It was quite difficult to do, to build an app that worked across all these different browsers. It was a pretty serious problem. So a tool like the one that I worked on called GWT was really useful for being able to not have to spend 30 minutes to add a click listener to a button so that it works on all the browsers that you care about for your web app, depending on what your users were using. It kind of helped to speed that up a little bit. Now, thanks to a lot of modern JavaScript libraries and frameworks, in that same 30 minutes, you don't have to spend that adding a click listener to a button. You could probably roll out an entire e-commerce website selling Hawaiian shirts, complete with payment processing, rolled out globally, supported on all the browsers that are out there, including probably mobile browsers as well, in that same 30-minute window because of the developments that occurred in the web development world. Well, that serves as an intro for me coming to this meetup, and it also serves as an intro because there's a kind of analogous story to that path of evolution in web development and Firebase. So who here knows that Firebase is basically, a real-time database? Okay, a lot of people. Now, who here also knew that the real-time database is one of 17 other products that are in the Firebase umbrella. And I'm going to put my hand down because I didn't know that. I didn't know that until recently. So Firebase, kind of analogous to that example I just gave with Google Web Toolkit, went through a similar kind of evolutionary process, right? What it targeted is, instead of web application development in general, it targeted mobile application development, whether that's for native apps or for web apps that are run on mobile devices. And at the time that it was acquired by Google, which is around 2014, what it focused on was serverless backends, right? So backends where you didn't have to worry about persisting your data, synchronizing your data. It offered a very easy solution for mobile application development so that you could focus on building the app and not have to worry about, like, where do I have to deploy this backend, how do I manage it, and so forth. So that was 2014, right? Now, similarly, over time, over the years, the same way that a lot of modern JavaScript libraries and frameworks came out so that you don't have to spend 30 minutes to add a button to Click Listener, but you can roll a whole website out, there's a lot of features that were added to Firebase to help in that space of mobile application development. So here's kind of the whole suite of all the products that exist in Firebase. There's quite a lot of them, and real-time database is still one of them. But there's a lot here. To give an example of why these might be useful for mobile application development, we can look at the first one there, all the way at the top left, which is authentication, right? So if you're building a mobile application, you probably have to deal with authentication, right? Getting your users authenticated, knowing who they are, persisting their experiences. And that can be a difficult problem to solve because there's a lot of different authentication providers out there. So, and in addition to supporting them, there's also, using email, password sign-in and whatnot, supporting all of that. So when Firebase thought about that, we're like, we want to make this easier, mobile application development in general. So let's build Firebase Authentication, which allows you to kind of, under 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, add authentication to your app across the major authentication providers you care about, including email and password login. More importantly, it also offers what's called anonymous authentication. That's really useful for cases where, let's say you're a game developer, right? And you don't want your user, when they first come into your game, they have to create an account or whatnot to start playing it. You want to just launch them into it, right? If you want to do that, you can use anonymous authentication. They'll log in a way where they don't have to fill out anything, but you can keep track of who they are. They play your game, they have fun, and if they want to save their experience or come back to it, you can then say, hey, do you want to create an account to come back to it, and then link that back to the anonymous authentication that you're using, and link it to their account and use it over the next time they visit. So it's pretty handy to do. It's very easy to implement, and that's kind of the spirit behind a lot of the products that you see here. One more that I wanted to talk about before I get into the web-specific stuff is something called Firebase Extensions. The reason why that hot label is there is because we just released that last month at the Firebase Summit in Madrid. And what Firebase Extensions are basically click-to-install solutions for very common problems that developers of mobile applications, again, whether native or web, might face. Here's some of them. So you basically see these in the Firebase console. And any of these you can click to install and enable them pretty much in a matter of a few minutes. We ran some code labs for some of these at the summit for developers who wanted to use some of this stuff in their apps and also just wanted to learn how it worked. And yeah, within minutes you can set any of these up. To give you an idea of what these are and what they do, this is a really popular one that we've seen a lot of adoption with so far. It's the Resize image extension. So it's a common use case that, let's say if your app has a user profile, there might be a picture that they upload to represent themselves in your app. And if they upload it, it might be like a full resolution image, and then you have to now scale it down, store it somewhere else, and make it available so the next time they come visit your app for their profile photo. What this does is automatically resize it for you by just specifying what dimensions you want images that are uploaded to your app to be resized to. And within a few clicks, it's set up. So this one is literally like a minute to configure, and then you have all that functionality built in. Normally, if you're going to build that yourself, it might take a few days of work, maybe a little bit longer, but in this case, it's all done for you. So extensions reuse other Firebase components. Going back to that image I showed earlier, this one, for example, uses cloud storage. That's where it's storing those files and the resized images that you need. So yeah, going back to this, it's reusing some of these. Firebase extensions use all of this. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these different products because if I did, we'd probably be here until tomorrow morning because there's a lot of stuff here. What I would invite you to do if you want to learn more about kind of what the evolution of Firebase and how these products came to be and how it can help for mobile app development, there's that bit.ly link at the bottom. That points to a Medium article that a developer wrote a few years ago, so it's a little bit dated, but it provides a good perspective on an overview of what Firebase is and its evolutionary path. So I would say check that out if you want to learn more about how this all came to be, also about some of these features, and then of course for any of these when you want to go more deeper, there's the docs. So today though, it's kind of talk focused on the web, so I should probably have some web specific content to talk about, and I do. This stuff. This is also new stuff that we recently announced last month, and that is Firebase Analytics for the web, remote config for the web, Firebase Cloud Messaging for the web, and Firebase Performance Monitoring for the web, which was actually at I/O. So much of the things that you saw on the previous slide, they do support the web, but some of the core pieces of Firebase, one of the biggest pieces actually, is Google Analytics for Firebase. It does a lot of interesting things, and it powers a lot of other features that you saw in ways that maybe you didn't know about if you thought that Firebase was just a real-time database, for example. So all of that stuff is available for the web, and this is kind of how I'm going to go about presenting the material to y'all. The first thing I'm going to talk about is analytics for web apps, right, and how it works and what it gives you. The next thing is Firebase Cloud Messaging and remote config. I'll talk about what it is in general, in case you haven't encountered it before, and then talk about what it can do for web apps if you wanted to use it. And then the last thing I'm going to do is show a demo of an actual web app that's using all of these things in a kind of live environment, as well as showing the Firebase console and what all these features look like in the console. So you get a good idea of not just the theory of this stuff, but some idea of what it looks like when you're actually using it. So with that, I'm going to get started. Now, I'm going to warn you that from here, there's a few slides that are going to get kind of very product heavy. That's because it's just kind of the nature of showcasing some of this stuff. I apologize for it, but I think it's going to be useful content, so hopefully it actually is quite helpful to do. Now, how many folks have used Google Analytics for Firebase before? Okay, about 4 or 5 hands raised, I think I saw. So, yeah, and also because this is a web-focused event, and we just released this last month, it's very possible you might not have encountered it, because this is something that a lot of Android and iOS developers have benefited from for a while, and that we just made available for the web. So unless you're an early adopter and started using it, which again, you'd have a special place in my heart if you did, you probably didn't encounter this yet. So I'll kind of give an overview first to explain what it is, and then go deeper into what it can do for the web, or for your web apps, rather. So in a nutshell, this is what Google Analytics for Firebase is. You add an SDK to your web app, or your native mobile app, whatever it is. Once you add that SDK on, you get some automatic out-of-the-box events just reported for you. You don't have to do anything. You just add that SDK on, and then these things just automatically start getting reported into the analytics console. So things like page views, first open, session start, all these details get reported in, and you can look at that later to get an idea of what's happening with your app and how it's being received by your users. Now, in addition to those out-of-the-box events, there's also custom events that you can log, which is fairly simple, fairly easy to do. And this is for events that are more specific to your app that you care about, right? So for example, if it's like a game, I might care how many times someone retried a specific level. I might care if they invited a friend to play the game as well, because that's an indicator of, is my game growing? I might care about whether they created maps, which level they commonly select, and so forth. So this is stuff that I might log as a custom event that you can also do for your web app. Now, once that's all done, that all pipes into the analytics dashboards that you'll see in the Firebase console. So those out-of-the-box events and the custom events generate these graphs that you can access to get an idea of what's going on. So this is just the general dashboard, which kind of gives you the bird's eye view of what's going on. You can see that there's engagement trends. You can see your user adoption. You can see any revenue metrics if you have some in here as well. And you can see general app stability, like is it crashing very often and so forth. So that's the dashboard view. In addition to all this event data that you're logging, you can filter it across a bunch of different dimensions. So you can filter it by location in the world, by different times. You can filter it by platform, so your web. If you also have an Android app and a native an iOS app as well, you can filter that and then look at this data specific to those platforms and even compare them to see which one is performing better and in which ways. This is an events dashboard where all the custom events that you're reporting, as well as the ones that are out of the box, you can look at them more deeply. You can see these segmented across demographics as well to see that custom events that you care about or conversion events, like friends being invited into your app, where is that happening more often? And where it is happening more often, what behavior do those users exhibit that's different from other areas where you want it to grow? And you've got a user retention graph. So this is basically, once you get a user visiting your app, how likely and how often are they coming back to it? And you can see that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and get a sense for how sticky is your app. And finally, one of the cooler features is the stream view. So this is kind of a real-time view of what's happening in your app. So you can actually see in real time what events are being generated by who and where, from where. In addition to that, you can also get an idea of when you release a new update for your application. You can see how it's being received in real time. And you can see how your users are navigating through the content that you've created. So one thing to note, actually, before I go on, is all these reports that I just shown, basically, as soon as you add the Analytics SDK to your project, this starts happening automatically. You don't have to do anything extra, and you just get these reports. For the custom events, that you have to log on your own if you care about custom events, but that's also it's a one line of logging the event when it happens in your app. So another really important feature that underlies analytics and powers a lot of other Firebase features is something called audiences. So what audiences do is that now that you have all this different custom event data and out-of-the-box data being reported, you can set up an audience that will be a user segment for your users based on what actions they've taken. So for example, going back to the e-commerce site and selling Hawaiian shirts, maybe you want to identify all the users who actually bought a shirt, right? So you can set an audience to say, okay, anyone who registered a purchase event, that is now my audience of purchasers of these Hawaiian shirts. And maybe you want to engage them in some way, right? Maybe you want to send notifications to them. Maybe you want to change the look and feel of the app for that specific group of users. There's different features in Firebase, such as Firebase Cloud Messaging and Firebase Remote Config, that allow you to do that and target those user segments in that way. And we'll kind of talk about that in a bit more detail. There's other products too, like A/B testing and predictions that use this data as well. For the web, the support isn't there yet, but that's on the roadmap. For now, it is available in native apps, and Remote Config and Firebase Cloud Messaging are the new ones that we just announced for the web, and I'll talk about how those work. So this was a slide that I should have went to earlier that just kind of is talking about that point about Firebase Analytics powering a lot of other Firebase features. I'll start with talking about Firebase Cloud Messaging and what it is. So has anyone encountered Firebase Cloud Messaging before? Okay, a few people. All right, not a ton. So Firebase Cloud Messaging, just to explain it to folks who haven't encountered it before, it's basically push notifications that you can send to your Android apps, iOS apps, and to the web, right, via the Firebase console. You can create a notification in the console and send it out to all of your users, and they'll receive it. You can also segment it by different audiences. And that's kind of what's new about the web support for Firebase Cloud Messaging. So before a month ago, it was possible to send FCMs and web push notifications via FCM or Firebase Cloud Messaging to your web app users, but you couldn't target them in any kind of specific way. You could just say, okay, if they've used my app before, I can send a push notification. But with analytics, you can target specific segments. So someone who bought something on your site, like those Hawaiian shirts, you could target them specifically and say, I want to send them a message, say there's a 10% off deal now on whatever, on these 5 varieties of Hawaiian shirts to engage them again and whatnot. So that's kind of one of the recent updates. Firebase Remote Config is another area where we have updates for web and that analytics also powers. Now this one's a bit more complicated to explain than FCM if you haven't encountered it before. And let me see, I imagine less hands go up for this one, but how many folks have encountered Firebase Remote Config before? All right, about the same amount as for FCM. So Firebase Remote Config, it's what it is, or a good way to think about it. It's kind of key value pairs of different values that you might want to push out to your clients that live in the cloud that you can push based on specific conditions. So let's run through an example to get a better idea what that means. So let's say you're building a game. Let's say it's a pinball game, and this is the color of your pinball, and these are the default values that your pinball has. Now, that's all good and fine, but let's say you want to do some special kind of seasonal promotions, right? Let's say come Canada Day, you want to change the colors of that ball. So you want the ball color to be white, and you want the ball glow to be red, but only when it's Canada Day. Now, if you're going to do that in a traditional development environment, you might have to roll out a new build of your app that has these new colors, roll it out on that day, hope that your users download and install it, and then get that experience, and then the next day you don't want it anymore, and then revert back to the previous colors that you used by default. What Remote Config does is allow you to specify these key value pairs in the cloud to say, on certain days, certain conditions, I want these values to be pushed instead. I want my ball color to be white, I want the ball glow to be red when the date time is greater than the start of Canada Day and less than the end of Canada Day. So that's the condition. On this condition, I want this to be pushed from the cloud to all of my client devices. And you can configure this in the console. And when that condition is met, when it does become Canada Day on your user's phone date time, and they wake up in the morning, they'll get these values. And the game will now update with those values and use those instead. And again, that doesn't require you rolling out anything yourself or rolling a new version of your app. It just kind of happens automatically. So that's what Remote Config is in general. And the big update is that this is now available for the web. Now, it's available for OS, like the conditions that I mentioned, for example, the date and time. You can also do it by locale. You can do it by different platforms that they're using, different versions of your app, different browsers that they might be coming from. For the web, browsers and locale are probably things that aren't a super huge deal because you can inspect, sorry, there's a fly buzzing around me. You can inspect the cache, the headers that come in on the requests from your users and determine that, okay, they're, whatever browser they're coming from, they're this browser user, they're in this locale, and then just serve up a different resource. Where it becomes really powerful, though, is tying it back to the analytics audiences. So you can use Remote Config and tie it to specific audience groups. So instead of, for example, the previous thing where it was the date time of when it's Canada Day, I want these values to be pushed, I could say when the user who's visiting my app is a purchaser, when there's someone who made a purchase before, I want these new values to go to them. So that's kind of the power of what it can do. So at this point, I kind of went through a lot of theory of what all these new features are, how analytics works, how it powers these other features. I think to make it more concrete, it might help to actually see all of this in action in an actual app. So this app is called Friendly Eats, right? It's like a cutting edge, going to define the next technological plateau kind of app. Not really. It's just a simple app for restaurant reviews. So just for samples. And it's also got it has an Android version that we made for it, an iOS version, and a mobile web version as well, and a web app as well. So let's take a look through what this app actually looks like. So I'm going to switch to my screen here. So let me make this a bit bigger. Okay, so this is Friendly Eats, right? It's got a bunch of different features, like, for example, filtering by different restaurant categories or cuisines that you might care about. You can filter by location, filter by price, and whatnot. And then when you do filter and you find a restaurant you want to try, you can click on it, view some of the other reviews that have happened for that restaurant, and then add your own as well. And say, for example, this place was fire. 1, because it's Firebase. 2, because this place is called Drive-Thru Fire, which is a pretty crazy name. But anyway, so you can do this kind of stuff, add comments and whatnot, and just navigate through and sign in and sign out, right? Now, all these actions that I just showed you of different things you can do, this has been instrumented with analytics behind it to send an analytics event whenever a user does any of these things. So when they submit a review, there's an analytics event that goes out for that. When they click on a restaurant and open a restaurant listing, another event gets fired for that. So now that we see the app and how it's instrumented, let's look at what the data looks like in the console for the events that we've actually captured. So this is the Firebase console, right? On the left-hand side here are all the different products that we saw earlier. Further down here is analytics. So I'm going to look at the dashboard. And so this provides that bird's eye view that I was mentioning of all the different ways that my users are engaging, what my retention looks like, what are my top conversion events. For example, here I can see open restaurant listing is like 170K, submit review is about 41K. So that's about what I expect, right? Not everyone's going to submit a review. So it kind of gives me an idea of, okay, things are working according to plan. So I can get just a general idea of, okay, what's going on in my app? Where are they spending the most time? Which activities in my Android app are they in? In addition to that, I can filter by different conditions. So for example, this is the new platform that we can filter by. So if I just want to see what's going on in my web app, I can apply this filter as well, and then see, okay, just what's going on in my web app. It's doing pretty terribly. But anyway. Right, so that's kind of the dashboard. If we go into events, here there's the out-of-the-box events that are being reported, and also the custom events that we care about. So for example, how often did someone cancel a review if they started writing one and then stopped? How often did people log in and log out? How many screen views did we record? Another really important one is this event here, submit reviews. And I can click through any of these, and then I can see how many events did I generate and by how many users. And here too, I can apply the same kind of filtering by platform and also by audiences, which I mentioned earlier, which kind of lets you define specific audience groups that you might care about. Now, a super common one for audiences that we've seen a lot of developers use for when they're using native apps, and now I'm sure we're going to see it for web apps now that we have support for it. It's those audiences that were very close to doing the conversion event we care about, but then stopped for some reason. So, for example, going back to the e-commerce site, someone who bothered to look for the Hawaiian shirt, click on it, open it up, put it into their shopping cart, but they didn't check out, right? So you want to know, you want to identify that audience because that's really important, and you want to kind of figure out what's going on, what's going wrong with that group. In the case of something like Friendly Eats, the conversion event is them submitting a review. That's kind of the most important thing we care about because that's what powers the whole app, right? That's what allows people to see the reviews that come in, and they should be encouraged to add their own. So if that's not happening, that's important. So I'm going to go ahead and create that audience. So I'm going to go over here into the Audiences tab. You can see I've already created this audience called Canceled Reviewers. But let me edit it to show you the steps involved in actually creating it. So I've defined this audience as including any user when this event occurs. This is open restaurant listing. So that means if they've opened a restaurant listing and then right after that, they started a review and that event was directly followed by them canceling the review, that means that they did, for whatever reason, they thought about doing a review and then stopped. And now I can address that audience. I can capture them and target them with things like FCM and things like remote config. I can send them notifications to say, hey, you didn't submit that review last time. Mind doing it now? That might be annoying to do, so maybe don't do that. But still, just to say that, as an example, that's how you can target them and send an FCM out. You can change the look and feel for the app for them as well. You can run some A/B tests for different versions of what the UI might look like for them submitting a review to see if that makes a difference in conversion rates. But in any case, here's this audience that I've created. I won't make any edits here. I'll use this same one. And now that I've created this audience, let's look into Firebase Cloud Messaging and remote config to actually use this in a meaningful way. So I'm going to go down here to Cloud Messaging. And this is that message that I want to send to those users who canceled the review to say, hey, come back. You didn't finish it last time. So this message or this notification is in draft form at the moment. Let me edit this. So here's kind of the message I want to send to them. Come back and finish your review. Please come back and finish your review that you started with us. Next, I can define the targeting. So here's where I can target first which app. Do I want to target my Android users, my iOS users, and my web users? My web users. And I also want to target those users who canceled the review. So I'm going to go here to user audiences, and I'm going to select that audience of these canceled reviewers. I'm going to use copy to because I think that's more recent that I made, and there's at least one user who's qualified for that. So now I'm targeting that audience. That one user who's qualified for that, of course, is me, because I triggered it myself by going into my app and not completing a review. And now I'm going to go next. Here I can schedule when I want to send this notification out. In this case, I'm going to do it now, but I could schedule it to go out on another day. I could set it to go out daily, but I'll just say send this out now. I could set a conversion event so that this will generate a report for example, in this case, if I'm sending this message out to these folks who canceled reviews, I want them to now submit one. So I could set this as a conversion event to get some metrics of, okay, if I've sent this thing and they've opened it, how many of them actually did the thing that I wanted them to do and submitted a review. For this example, I won't put it there, but you can do it if you like. And then some other options here that are less important. And then you can hit review and hit publish. Now, as I mentioned, I qualified myself for this audience yesterday by going into the app and not submitting a review, or opening a restaurant listing and not submitting it. So this should target me, but it sometimes takes a while to qualify for the audience, so it might not. So let's see if this works. Just published it. I should see a notification pop up soon. And if I don't, then there's another example I'll show of browser targeting. Yeah, it's not working because I don't think I qualified for it yet. So instead what I'll do is I'll duplicate this. And instead of targeting this audience, I'll just target my web users, and I'll add a condition to, let's say, just target my Chrome users. What's that? Oh, someone's on the phone. I thought they were asking me a question. All right. All right. So in this case, I'm targeting all the Chrome users. This is going to bother a bunch of people who have tested the app at Google. They'll understand. And then I'll go through here, click through next, and then I'll send this notification out. So review, publish, and now it should pop up here. Definitely should pop up here, but I don't know what's going on. It's not projecting. Oh yeah, it did come up, but for some reason I didn't see it. It is over here in my notification tray. It didn't show up in my browser for some reason. But in any case, that's kind of the demonstration of how you'd use Firebase Cloud Messaging and the targeting options to send these notifications to your users. And next is remote config. So in this case, let's say I want to show a banner the next time a user comes back to my app. Let's say those same users who canceled the review, I want to show them a banner to say, hey, submit that review. So in a similar way, I'll define a remote config variable here, unfinished reviews. This is actually, there's a condition in my web code that just says, if unfinished reviews, show a notification. And by default, it's false. So by default, I won't show the notification to anyone. But if they're part of this condition, the condition of dialog for unfinished reviewers, I will show this notification. So this is the remote config parameter, and this is the condition of dialog for unfinished reviews right here. This one here. And if we look at how it's defined, it's defined as web users who are part of the audience of canceled reviewers, right? So that's the condition. If they're a part of that audience, I want that value to be true, so it shows the banner. Now again, my user is not qualified in this audience because I just registered it yesterday, so I'll change this to Chrome users only. So I'll say, for example, actually no, I'll leave this one alone, and I'll add a condition to my remote config variable. So here's my remote config variable, unfinished reviews, and I'll add a value or condition for Chrome users that'll set this to true. So now this is saying that for anyone who's a Chrome user and anyone who's part of that audience, it's going to show that notification. So that was kind of a lot to digest, but hopefully was kind of useful to get an idea of what these updates are and how to use them in your web apps. Enabling all of this is very easy to do. You basically create a Firebase project, add your web app to that project, and add the SDK into your web app via a script tag. And then you've kind of got analytics running. So that's kind of most of the talk. We do have time for Q&A. Now, as I mentioned, Firebase is a very wide product. There's lots of different products we focus on. I'm most familiar with the ones that I covered today, but I'll try to answer any questions you have about Firebase as well. So, and that's my talk. So thanks so much.